Many chess players neglect the endgame. Maybe you're one of them. In this video, we're going to fix that. I'm going to share 6 mistakes which you need to stop making if you're to reach a rating of 2000 in chess. First of all, let's take a look at a very common mistake in this rook and pawn endgame. Now, even though black is down a pawn, black should be able to draw this, but only if black knows the correct way. If black doesn't know the technique here, then the common mistake that you'll see is a check from the rear. Rook to f1 check in this case. But now white replies with king to e6 and black is lost. Notice that the pawn shields the white king from the black rook being able to give any more good checks. And in addition, white is actually threatening checkmate right now. Rook to a8 is the threat. So black's really got to do something about that. Rook to d1, for example. So now if white plays the check, black can block. But actually this is still winning for white because the simplest is that white trades the rooks and then is going to win the pure pawn endgame. This pawn is going to promote, white will have an extra queen and white will win. So instead, in the original position, what black should do is set up what's known as the Philidor position, also known as the third rank defense. With the move rook to b6, not an easy move to find if you don't know the correct technique. The point is that now white is prevented from coming into e6 like we saw in the other line. And the only real way for white to try to make progress is to advance the pawn. But once the pawn is advanced, now black's plan changes and now black goes for the checks from behind. So move the rook all the way back to b1. And let's say that white moves the king up to f6. Now you give the checks from behind. I think the reason that the mistake is so common is that you can mix up the positions, right? It looks similar, this position. The pawn is on the 6th rank instead of on the 5th rank. But in these endgames, it makes all the difference. The thing now is that the white king can't shield itself like it could before, right? In the other line, the king could come into e6. But once the pawn has moved forward, and we see the checks, the king can't come in here, and black is just going to be able to give checks continuously. If the white king ever moves too far away from the pawn, then black will be able to win it. So that's the mistake, and that's what to do instead in this rook and pawn endgame. Learn this position so that you can get a draw even when you're down a pawn. If you found that last lesson to be instructive, then click subscribe for more. I've got plenty more great chess content coming up in the pipeline. Now on to our second mistake, which is a different type of rook and pawn endgame. This time it's black with the extra pawn, trying to promote it on h1. So the pawn is just one square away from promoting, but black's own rook is blocking the pawn's promotion path. Also notice that white has got their rook on the h-file, so the black rook can't step away because the pawn would just be lost, and then it's a draw. The position is actually a draw right now as it stands, but there is a common mistake which white can make here, and that is to bring their king closer, which is very natural, trying to, let's say, bring the king all the way over to g2 and hopefully try and win the pawn. But this allows black to play a trick here, which is well worth knowing from both sides, both so that you can take advantage of it if your opponent makes this blunder, and to avoid making this blunder yourself. The trick is here to play rook to a1, giving up the pawn, but having the skewer as the follow-up. The white king's got to move, and when the white king does move, then the white rook is lost, and black will win the king and rook versus king endgame. What white should do instead in this position is actually move their king backwards and forwards between the only 2 safe squares on the board. And those 2 squares in this case are a2 and b2. So let's just show what would happen, because probably white is worried about black bringing their king closer and closer to the pawn, right? But if this happens, as soon as the king makes contact with the pawn, then white can start giving checks with their rook, which black is not going to be able to escape. If the king gets closer and closer to the rook, well, you can always bring the rook all the way down here, let's say, and the king won't be able to keep chasing the rook indefinitely. Something like this, right? This is possible for white to draw because the rook of blacks will never be able to move away without the pawn being lost. So there's the mistake, there's how to punish it, and there's how to avoid making it yourself. The third mistake is failing to recognize that every tempo matters in a pawn race. Before we get into the example to illustrate this though, if you'd like my help to improve your chess, then click the link in the description below, check out the Road to 2000 Chess Improvement Program, and we can work together to improve your game. Now what we need to take a look at here is what white should do after black captures on b5, because the mistake that I see all the time at lower levels is for white to recapture. But this gives black a crucial extra move to promote their own pawn. Let's play this out. The pawns advance and are eventually going to queen at the same time, and this should be a draw. This mistake is extremely natural. It's almost automatic, right? Black takes your pawn, you take back. But in a pawn race, the mindset needs to be different. If white pushes the pawn straight away, then black is going to find themselves a move short. White gets a queen, and well, in this case, the pawn just gets lost. And this is an easy win for white. So try and remember this. Anytime you're in a pawn race, prioritize pushing your pawns as fast as possible. One tempo can make all the difference. Mistake number 4 is failing to understand the power of a passed pawn. Take a good look at this position where it's black to move. And now try to answer, is this winning for black, or is it winning for white, or should this be a draw? Pause the video if you need to. Well, with correct play, this is winning for black. White has 3 pawns versus 2 black pawns, but it's the quality of black's passed pawn which is decisive. Black can play king to e4, and now white is in zugzwang. If white moves either of these pawns, then it's just going to get captured. And if the white king steps backward, then the black king infiltrates, and eventually this pawn is going to promote. That'll be a queen, and black wins. But the mistake that black could make here is to give up this pawn and go after the white pawns. King to c3 would be a horrible blunder because it would allow white to eliminate the passed black pawn, and although black is going to win some of the white pawns, white is going to be left with one very important pawn which is going to be decisive. Black's king is in no position to defend. I think the thing about these king and pawn endgames is that it's easy to get confused. You could have in mind a similar but not the same position, such as this, right? Where in this case you do give up the pawn because you're able to go over and win all the pawns on the other side. This is not the same as the other position though, because white is not left with a pawn of their own, black's king is too close, and now this pawn is going to promote. So it does come down partly to understanding, and it also comes down partly to calculation. Don't make assumptions in king and pawn endgames based on rules of thumb. Try and calculate it out. Even if you think you know the rule, it never hurts to push yourself to calculate that one extra move. Mistake number 5 is advancing pawns too soon. To illustrate this, I've got a game played by one of my students right at the beginning when we were working together. Now, my student here is 2 pawns up, so should be winning this. But white has just played rook to b7, attacking this pawn on a7. I think the most practical move here for black is to play rook to f7, just defending this pawn and inviting a trade of rooks. And among players of this level, we could see another type of mistake in the endgame, which is the player with the material disadvantage going for this trade, in which case this would be trivial for black to win. So white would need to respond by retreating the rook, and the game would continue. But instead, what happened in the game after rook to b7 was my student played d3. maybe expecting that his opponent was going to capture on a7, in which case he could play rook to d8, and now indeed there is no way to stop this pawn from advancing all the way to d1. But my student's opponent may have surprised my student here by playing rook to d7, because now this pawn is overextended. Now I know that some of these concepts can seem to conflict with each other. One of the earlier lessons I said that every tempo matters in a pawn race and you need to push them as fast as possible. And here I'm saying you need to hold back. So what's the difference? Well, here, when the pawn is on d3, it's no longer defended. But back on d4, the pawn is defended by black's other pawns. On d3, it can be a target. On d4, it's protected. So black has a material advantage, which is known as a static advantage, which means black doesn't need to be in a hurry here. Black has time. Black has time indeed to defend this pawn. Why rush? You can improve your position slowly, right? You can improve your position by maybe getting the king into position, and only then, once everything is ready, advancing this pawn. Because after d3 in the game, what happened was my student's opponent played rook to d7, and then my student tried to defend, but through a series of accurate captures, eventually that pawn was lost, and now black is only up one pawn rather than two. And this is now possible for white to draw, and in fact that's what happened. So before you push a pawn, like in this game, ask yourself that if you do, is it going to become overextended? And if it is going to become overextended, maybe it's better to wait. I know that 99% of you are just going to want to watch the free videos which I put out on YouTube, and that's totally fine. But for a small number of you, there is the chance to work with me to improve your chess. You can check that out by clicking the link in the description below. Now, the Road to 2000 Chess Mentorship Program isn't for everyone. I only have limited time, and I can only work with those who are serious. But if that sounds like you, click the link in the description below, apply to work with me, and we can get you the sorts of results in chess that you didn't think were possible. Mistake number 6 is capturing one of the enemy's weak pawns rather than defending one of your own important pawns. Let's take this position, for example, where it's white to move. Black is attacking the pawn on b4, and white is attacking the pawn on d5 twice. The mistake would be to take the pawn on d5, because then white loses the pawn on b4, and after a couple more trades, white is still a pawn up, but this position should be possible for black to draw with correct play. Instead, white should take a time out. This pawn on b4 is a passed pawn. This actually goes back to one of the other lessons I shared earlier in the video. So white can take the time to defend this pawn, and then capture this pawn next. See the difference? In the other line, effectively, white is trading these two weak black pawns for their own strong pawns on b4 and c5. But in the line where you defend this pawn is going to fall anyway, and white is able to retain a very strong advantage. I don't know what black even does here. Maybe one check. It's not important. That pawn is falling next, and white has still got their pawn on b4, and with these two strong connected passed pawns, white should go on to have an easily winning game. Now that you've learnt these mistakes to avoid, it's a good time to learn about the good habits which you want to instill. This video runs through the 7 habits of highly effective chess players. In it, I'll show you ways to transform your way of thinking towards that of a stronger player. So check it out. I really think it'll help improve your results.